The reading today is from John's Gospel, and it is a prayer of Jesus that his disciples overheard, and John saw fit to put it in these words. I ask not only on behalf of these, but also on behalf of those who will believe in me through their word, that they may all be one. As you, Father, are in me, and I am in you, that they may also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. The glory that you have given me, I have given them, so that they may be one, as we are one. I and them, and you and me, that they may become completely one, so that the world may know that you have sent me, and have loved them even as you have loved me. That word, being one, keeps cropping up in that scripture. Being in Jesus is John's language for describing a state of relationship and communion with those who seek to follow Jesus. Actually, it's kind of like a connection that shapes everything we do. All of us have probably known something from time to time that happened that kind of took over our lives. Which usually means a bad thing. You run out of money, or there's some kind of disaster, or sickness, or condition. And all of a sudden, everything in your life is shaped around that. Sometimes it's a good thing. You meet somebody. It's positive. Or sometimes, you just kind of plug into your faith, and that relationship with Jesus becomes kind of significant in everything that you do. I don't know exactly what this one has to do with us as relationship to God, or us as relationship to one another in a church, or churches, or Christians everywhere. Obviously, we who have different theological beliefs and other groups of Christians don't share the same ideas, and sometimes we don't get along very well. So I don't know if that oneness is going to happen. We're disciples of Christ, and we have what we say a Big Ten, because we welcome people with lots of different perspectives to come and be a part of the church. And, we're not trying to hammer you into one particular position on things. We trust that you can figure that out yourself. But other groups are a little more harsh about, if you don't believe this, you're not in our camp. Jesus maybe thought enough of this whole idea of oneness that he prioritized it. This is the last time Jesus was with just the disciples before his arrest and crucifixion. So he prays for the immediate community, but he also prays for those who will come in the future, that we would all be one. Maybe he saved it for last because he knows that's something we're going to struggle with. We need it. There's a little plaque I've seen a number of times that says, "Prayer changes things." And this woman looked at that and said, "I don't like that." I said, "You don't like prayer?" "No, I don't like change." Most of us really don't like change. We're kind of comfortable with where we are. We feel secure, and change doesn't happen easily. Although change is inevitable. I've heard this idea that 6% of a congregation, on an average, will change every year. If you have 1,000 people or you have 10 people, you can kind of count on about 6% people will, for one reason or another, be no longer able to come or choose not to come, and new people come in. So, you think, well, congregation is kind of the same, but you have this change all the time. And over a course of a number of years, all of a sudden, huge change, half the people are gone in what, 8 years or something, 9 years? We are in a period of change right now, and in this church, as we're looking for the next senior pastor. We are part of a fairly small, 3,600 churches, but relevant denomination. And we have certain things that bind us together. We say we're in covenant. We agree to work together and kind of try to abide by some rules to get along, which we set up for ourselves. There is a ethical standards for congregations document that our board is going to be looking at this year. It's been around a while, and it's just mostly common sense. Is, how do we treat each other? What's the most ethical way to treat other people in the congregation, ministers, the community, other denominations, people of faiths other than Christianity? Having some ethical boundaries really helps us all get along. And there's a statement of ethical standards for ministers. It's called Minister Code of Ethics. It's on my door of my office if you want to see it specifically. But it kind of is a kind of a marker of some of the behaviors that I need to have. It deals with my personal conduct, my relationship to the church and other ministers. For example, I'm the interim. I'm not a candidate for this job, and I'm not to have anything to do with the search committee. That's typically two things that the interim needs to understand. But I have other responsibilities, and they go with, like, helping the congregation have healthy goodbyes. When you are no longer the pastor, then you don't continue to do pastoral things with the church. I tried to explain that years ago in the congregation, and I said, I'm going to be leaving, and I'm going to be actually going to Shreveport, and I'm no longer your pastor, and I can't do those pastoral weddings and funerals and stuff like that. And I overheard this man say, well, he doesn't care about us anymore. Well, actually, I really care about you a lot, because I'm not going to mess up the work of the next person. That's just kind of some understood. So, we thank David Bryce for his years of ministry here, but we don't call upon him for pastoral duties. The interim is a unique time. Any of you read our church newsletter? A few. Thank you. I've tried to explain a number of aspects of that. My job is to lead worship and to help the elders with the pastoral responsibilities and help you get ready for the next minister. Well, that's kind of a lot of my time, but also help you kind of update what you need to get updated. Publicity, practices. Some things are relatively easy. We've been kind of working on the church directory, because as soon as you print one, it's out of date. Somebody's moved, changed their phone number or email or something like that. But we're trying to get that updated for right now. We're also working on a program of planned giving, because a lot of people like to think about, if I could leave something for the church, when I pass, or like to make a donation to a permanent fund that will always be there for Kingside Way to use. And we're trying to come up with a policy so we make that easy for people to do. Some things are a little hard, like doing youth programming in 2019. It's a lot harder than it's ever been. We haven't really started on this, but we need a program of safety and security. Like, if there was a tornado warning right now, what would we do? We could all run screaming out of here with our hands in the air. I mean, that's a plan. We could do that, but there's plenty of areas in this building that are secure. So where are they, and how do we get there? It's just things like that. You think ahead of time, what would you do if this and that happened? And we'll be working on that. Also, one of my responsibilities is to make sure there's no systemic problems that are holding the church back. I haven't really seen anything, but we'll be working on that. And then we're also going to partner with a disciple group out of Indianapolis called Project Epiphany, and they're going to help us do some long-range planning. And that'll unfold as the year goes by. That gives every member of the church family a chance to have some input on where do we go from here. A lot of times I've found, and maybe you served on committees and stuff like that, that it kind of gets to be a grind, and you kind of forget, where's God in this process? Because even the little things that we do, the regular things that we do, they have things to do with God. Moving the stuff from one service to another. That's just a task, but it makes worship possible. Meeting and working things out in committee sometimes pretty tedious, but where's God? We ask the question as we move forward as a church and come up with new priorities and plans, we sure want to make sure that God is in that process. There's a book that's come out recently about how churches work together. It's by a woman who teaches at Asbury Theological Seminary in Kentucky. And she said, if we could cut through our complacency or despair, we might be really shocked at what's at stake here. The character of our shared life in congregations, communities, and families has the power to draw people to the kingdom or to push them away. How we live together is the most persuasive sermon we'll ever preach. If someone comes in the door and they sense that we're fighting, they're out the door as soon as they can. If they come in and they sense these people have a sense of care for one another and mission, there's an interest in coming back. She writes that there's four things the church should do. I'll just go briefly. One is to be able to express gratitude, which is paying attention to the good things that are going on and appropriate thanking people for what they do. The other side of that is stop feeding the cycle of complaint. And instead of that, turn your attention to God's faithfulness and goodness. The second thing she talks about is keeping promises. I kind of have a nightmare about, just offhandedly saying to somebody, well, I'll call you or come by or we'll get together or I'll get you this book or whatever. And then I forget about it. I may not remember, but that person will. And it's a negative. We have made promises to one another when we've written some policies. It's, how we function as a church. And we need to hold on to those things. If we don't like the policy, then let's change the policy, but let's just don't run around it. The third thing she mentioned is living truthfully. When we are public about our own frailties and problems, and we're honest about who we are and kind of transparent, other people can take that and use it against us if they choose. We want people to think that we're good at what we do, and we're kind of afraid if they knew the truth about us that they would be deeply disappointed. But, to be honest with each other is part of the truthful living. And truthful living involves being able to talk to people honestly, and if there's something that we need to work out, we need to work it out, don't just ignore it. And finally, she says that for churches to be authentic, they need to be offering hospitality. Well, that's great. We welcome people, and I hope everybody feels welcome, but it's also deep theological roots in terms of Jesus said at the end of time, there's this separation of the sheep and the goats. And the sheep are good, goats bad, and they're separated because of what? I was hungry and you gave me food, a stranger and you welcomed me, or or you didn't do those things. And it's what you did to the least of these that are members of the family. Jesus said, you did it to me. So it's not just we welcome people that are just like us. It's like we welcome everybody. That's hospitality. He also taught that if you're going to give a dinner party, don't just invite the people that are going to invite you back to something. Think about those who can't have a party. The poor and the lame and the blind. And because you'll be blessed if you include those people. Now, this sounds really countercultural because probably none of us are very good at doing this. But it was just as countercultural in Jesus' time as it was today. To be hospitable means to open our doors to everyone. So, here's some remarks of what it means to be a church and to be one and to live out this gospel. I like parables, stories. Scripturally, you think of favorite parable? Somebody can say something if you have one.
Prodigal son.
Prodigal son, thank you. Any others? Woman at the well is a great story. How about the rabbi's gift? Have you heard that one? Well, it's not a biblical story, but it's one of my favorite parables. You may have heard it before, and if you have, some of you heard it earlier this morning. It's okay, because every time you hear a parable, you're different than the time you heard it before. So it's kind of new each time. There was a monastery that had fallen on hard times. The monks were all old. There was only 5 of them left. They struggled to keep things going. And they feared for the future of their little order. Now, at one time, this monastery had been vibrant. There had been many monks that worked there and kept up the grounds in a beautiful state. And they were a real force in the realm. But things have changed. In their forest in which the monastery was, there was also a cabin. And sometimes an old rabbi would come to the cabin for a retreat and spend a few days. And the monks kind of sensed when the rabbi was there. Sometimes they would see smoke from his stove. So they realized that the rabbi was there, and the abbot, the head of the monastery, said, I will go talk to the rabbi. Perhaps he has a word for us that would be helpful. And the abbot did, and the rabbi welcomed them, and they had tea, and they talked about issues, and the rabbi said, oh, I know, it's so hard. People aren't interested in religion like they used to be, and yes, I know it's difficult. They read the scripture together and prayed together. And the abbot, on the way out, said, is there just anything that would be helpful that you could tell me? And the rabbi said, I don't really have any advice for you other than, one of you may be the Messiah. And the abbot thought that was kind of strange, but anyway, he went on back to the monastery, and the other monks were eager to hear what the rabbi might have said, what advice he had given. And the abbot said, oh, he didn't really have anything to tell me. He was sorry. He just said kind of a strange thing, that one of us might be the Messiah. The monks all thought that was strange too. Nothing changed for a while, and they began to think about that, and they thought, what if the rabbi was really telling the truth, and one of us was the Messiah? If that were true, it must be the abbot, because he's such a good man, and he's led our order for so many years. Or maybe it's Brother Thomas. He's so holy. always seems to know the right scripture. Or, no, it's not Brother Elred, because he's crotchety and gripey much of the time, but he's always right. Or could it be Brother Philip? He's quiet. He never says anything, but gosh, he's always there if there's a problem or you need somebody. So all of the monks began to think about these things, and they began to think about each other, and they began to change in terms of how they treated each other. And they began to have such respect for one another and how they interacted that all of them felt that. And it began to make a difference about how they felt about themselves and their order. This monastery was in a forest, and sometimes people from the communities around would come there and picnic, and sometimes they would even go into the chapel and pray. And the people that would come from time to time began to notice there was something different about this monastery. There was just this atmosphere that was so positive. And they began to come more often, and some of them invited friends to come. And they would picnic and sometimes go to the chapel, and they just noticed that how these men all respected one another so highly and respected them. And after a while, more and more people came, and then a young man talked to some of the monks about joining their order, and then another one, and then another one. And soon there were a lot of monks, younger ones, and workers in this order. And they again became a real influence in their realm. John 17 records Jesus' prayer to his Father and for the church, for you and me, that we could be one so the world might believe, because that's all the world has is us. He trusts us to carry on that gospel. Jesus left a number of words that we hold on to dearly. And one of them is found in how we close our service each week, the act of communion. So that we know that in the presence of ordinary things, there is Jesus. He offers us a cup, bread, things that we see every day. It said, in these things may you have life. We also share a time to give back, an offering. Today we're doing a special offering that works in our denomination for new church starts, and also with the art program, which is a local program. The offering is divided between those two things. So if you choose to, you may come forward as we share bread, broken, a symbol of Jesus giving himself to those who sought his understanding. A cup that is a cup of blessing. It symbolizes a new understanding of God that is in Jesus. And so it's just these ordinary things that we do. We have the opportunity to remember Jesus.